I'm super excited for this key concept. We're in period 6. This is 1900 to the present, and we're looking specifically at the globalization of culture and economics. So that includes some of the responses to the meltdowns that happened, like the Great Depression in the 20th century. And it also includes the spread of ideas and protests and movements for human rights, for environment rights, for feminism, right? So, I'm dressed for the part today, but I'm going to show you exactly what you need to focus on for this key concept. Ready? Let's go. All right, key concept 6.3. This is the last of the key concepts, so you've made it through all 19 of them. Woohoo! So, as you've seen, there's so much that happens in the 20th century. The global conflicts, the decolonization, the movements of people. The population itself is going to, I think, more than double in the century alone. So, with all of that, there's a lot that changes that occur with culture, with globalization, with economics. It becomes more complicated. There's more people. There's more spread out. We have cultures spreading like never before. The technology itself is helping for that. So there's some massive changes that we're going to see in this key concept in terms of culture and economics. Because of those global conflicts, the communist response is going to look one way, right? You've got the two superpowers, the communists and the capitalists. So the communist response is more collectivization of their economy. They are moving, they don't want to see classes, right? They want everyone to be on the same level, which means that nobody would have private property. So their movements in China and the Soviet Union are a more collective response in an effort to do better, boost their economy, but also like move away from social classes. The capitalist response is going to look a lot different. So you've got the global conflicts, and then things like the Great Depression that happen, and these global crises are the way that the capitalists are going to deal with them, especially in the New Deal, is you've got a bigger like government role in society, in the economy. So whereas before the New Deal, the government would have kind of stayed out of it. That's the like laissez-faire policy. After the New Deal with FDR, you're going to see like, especially, the United States government is taking more of an active role in like everyday life for Americans. Free market policies in the 80s are going to look a little bit different. That's kind of the movement away from that. So Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in Britain are kind of promoting a return to the old way of things, where that the government shouldn't have a role in everyday life, right? So here's FDR signing in some bills. After the Great Depression in the 1930s, he signed in a lot of different policies that still exist today, right? Like Social Security, different like workers' organizations. So that's an important piece of the capitalist response. Also, just quick note, look at how many men are in that picture, and they're all just like white dudes just staring at us. Anyways, so the international political organization is a big piece of this. Nobody wants to go to a world war, especially after we've seen one. You don't want another, but they tried to stop it. The League of Nations was Woodrow Wilson's idea to be more diplomatic, to have a place to promote peace rather than going to a global war. The United States never actually signs on to that. There are several senators that kind of block that, so they aren't able to join. And in general, the League of Nations doesn't have much power. It's not able to stop Japan from invading Manchuria. It's not able to stop Hitler from annexing Austria or Czechoslovakia. It clearly doesn't have any presence strong enough to prevent World War II. So there we go. We have, another global war. So after the second one, then we have the UN come about in 1945, and this is kind of the 2.0 version of the political organizations that can internationally promote diplomacy. And so the UN, this is based in New York, and even today it has a lot more power to promote peace globally. International economic organizations are something we're going to start to see as well after World War II. Part of this is coming out of just like, how do we, in a more globalized society, keep track of our trade networks, our money, our banking. You don't want to see another global depression like the 30s, like, in the end of the 20s. It's those things that really led to World War II, led to the rise of fascism. So how can we prevent that? Well, we can regulate money more. We can regulate global economies so that we don't have such dramatic, catastrophes in the economy. So you've got the World Bank, you've got the IMF. These are just two examples. You don't necessarily have to know too much about either one, just that they exist and that they regulate money. The humanitarian organizations, some of them, like the Red Cross, start in the end of the 19th century, but something like UNICEF is going to happen after World War II. Europe is completely devastated from the war. So many cities were just flattened by the firebombing, by, the tanks rolling in. And so UNICEF is in an effort to help children of Europe who don't have homes, who don't have food, who may not have parents. And then Amnesty International is another organization that is helping people. So, in the Red Cross, it originally starts at the end of the 19th century, but we're really going to see women take more of a role in these wars of, in World War I and World War II because of organizations like the Red Cross, where women are able to become nurses on the front lines. Regional trade agreements like the EU, NAFTA, and CETO. CETO is Southeast Asian Treaty. So we've got like the EU and NAFTA today you might hear about them a lot in the news. So just a quick little history of them. They're built to make trade easier between these different regions, right? So in the EU, any European country that is included in this, it sort of breaks down those borders a bit. It makes the flow of people and the flow of goods much easier. And the same thing is true in North America. So Canada, the US, and Mexico have a trade agreement as well. Where we start to see pushback against these things is when we have an increase of xenophobia, where there's a fear of people crossing borders too easily and that might be a bad thing. Multinational corporations, obviously you've heard of, all of these corporations before, and there are even more. Before the 20th century, you don't have something like this. You do have like some corporations that are more global, like joint stock companies type deal, but it's totally different with this, right? These are like selling goods to people everywhere. Right, you can go anywhere in the world and buy a Coca-Cola. You can go anywhere in the world and probably find a Starbucks. So many people are on Facebook. This is bringing people together like we've never seen before. And it's spreading, most of these countries are coming from the US. It's spreading American culture more than we've ever seen before, for better or worse. Some of the environmental movements, so I'm just going to kind of get into a few things. There are massive movements for more rights, for like these like liberal movements that happen. So the first one is environmental. Greenpeace is an organization that is, basically to protect the environment. And so you see Greenpeace protests sometimes. They do a lot of work around environmental protections. This one, they're protesting, I think, some sort of like nuclear waste. Human rights movements, the atrocities of the 20th century are going to give way to like the Declaration of Human Rights, which I totally recommend checking out. It's kind of interesting to see what they've laid out as what should be included as a human right. And honestly, the most interesting piece is how many of those things still happen, even though they're listed as that they shouldn't. So, it's something that we have. It's an important document, but I'm not sure how effective it is. Feminism is, the first wave of feminism starts in the 19th century with suffrage movements, but that continues into the 20th century. Like the US doesn't have, women's suffrage until 1920, I think. So that's crazy, right? So and then you have the second wave of feminism in the 60s and 70s that is more focused on like workers' rights and family rights for women. So it's more about opportunities beyond just like the vote. So like here's an example of one of the feminist protests. Some of the terms that you could know is NOW. It's the National Organization for Women, and Betty Friedan. So she wrote the Feminine Mystique. So those are some of the important terms about feminism. There's some different movements in religion and politics. We're going to start to see a new brand of fundamentalism in Islam. So it's like Islamism. In Iran in 1979, the revolution there overthrew the Shah, who had been backed by the U.S., and then they very heavily supported Ayatollah Khomeini, who then basically established Iran as a theocracy, which meant it was very much like fundamental, basically like ruled by religion. So Iran looks a lot of the ways that it does today because of this fundamental movement. Pop culture is also going to diffuse like we've never seen it. We have these massive pop culture icons that extend across boundaries, right? So 2 examples that the College Board actually identifies is Bob Marley and reggae and Bollywood, right? These massive movements. Another 2 that had been listed before were the Olympics and cricket and like the World Cup, right? You don't have things like that. Like the Olympics start at the end of the 19th century. So this is all a 20th century phenomenon. And they also make for really good DBQs. They've actually picked a couple DBQs from this specific topic. So don't overlook these things just because you don't necessarily think they're important. They are super important. All right, so here are all of the things that you need to know for 6.3. I would suggest pausing on this slide so you can take some notes so that you can make sure that you know all these key words. There's a lot of key terms to know, and just make sure you know the ones, go over the ones that you feel least comfortable with. I would say that would be your best bet. All right, so it's been real. 6.3 has been fun, and good luck on your exam. Hey, this is High Level History, and I'm Amanda Doemerall. If you're an AP World student, tell me how it's going in the comments below. And for more AP World content and review, be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HighLevHistory.